would have a scam where he would pirate the masters of some major artists. He would pirate the masters, he would duplicate these masters, and he would fill the retail stores with them at a lower price than the record labels. The big labels would sell them to the stores. So these records were selling extensively. They were his records, he was getting the revenue, the major labels were getting nothing, and the artists were getting beat out of their royalties. Now the artists, of course, would go into the stores and they'd see these records flying off the shelves, and they would go back to the labels and say, hey, you know, we see these stores stacked with our records, and yet we're not getting the royalties. What's going on? So the big labels, they do their investigation. They find out that there's counterfeit records going into the stores at a cheaper price. So who do they call? They call Morris Levy. They say, Morris, we got this problem. These record companies, they're selling counterfeit records. Our artists are not getting the royalties, and we're getting beat out of revenue. Can you help us? And Morris would say, of course, I can help you. It's going to cost you X amount of dollars. He would charge them hundreds of thousands of dollars to put a stop to those counterfeit records going into those stores. And who did he put a stop on? Himself, because he was the one that was doing it. So he would stop them. And he would actually then start doing again with another label in another company. He formed like a daisy chain of companies to continue to pull this scam on the major record labels. And I'm talking about, this is big money. This is huge money. So he pulled that quite successfully for quite some time. And of course, who was going to mess with him? They all knew his organized crime involvement. Nobody would mess with him. It was better for the record companies to pay him, and they did, the major labels. Another thing that the mob was quite involved in at that time was something called payola. Now, you might be familiar with that term, but just so you know, it's illegal for anyone, whether it be an artist, a record label, an independent agent, to pay a DJ to push somebody's record to the top and give it more play. You can't do that, okay, unless you disclose the fact that somebody's paying you to do that, because the more airplay that a record gets, normally the better the sales. So it was a common practice. Organized crime guys would do it all the time. Morris Levy was the king of this, where he would be paying DJs under the table to push his artist label. And he had a lot of big artists at the time. I mean, Sammy Davis, Tommy James, Pearl Bailey, you name it. All the big artists in the 60s, many of them, I should say, were signed to Roulette Records. And he made a ton of money in that regard. So payola was big. A lot of people were indicted on that at various times. It's illegal to do that. It's only legal if you disclose the fact that you're paying the DJ, but they don't want to do that. When somebody hears that they're paying somebody to push the record, well, that kind of taints the record. Nobody's going to buy it. So they would never disclose it. So payola was huge. And even the big labels were involved in this in some way. They were hiring guys under the table to pay the DJs at the time. There was a big case, I think, with Alan Freed, who was a huge DJ at the time out of Cleveland and New York. He was involved in some payola scam at the time. So that's one thing that Morris Levy was heavily involved in. Publishing. For those of you that are not involved in the record business or don't understand it at all, publishing is where all the money is. You write the song, you make the money. Every time that song is played by anybody at any time, AppScam, BMI, they keep a record of it, and you get paid. Well, I'll tell you what Morris used to do. He used to fraudulently put his name as one of the writers, one of the songwriters, and he would keep all the publishing. He beat a lot of his artists that way. And they were afraid to say anything because it was Morris. They knew his connections. They didn't want to say anything. He made millions in publishing, okay, millions in publishing by, again, fraudulently saying that he was one of the writers of the songs. He did that all the time.